is Anselmo De Leon, the chairman of the Clinton Planning and Zoning Commission. It is 7:01 p.m. and this meeting, public hearing is in session. We have a quorum. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Anselmo De Leon.
Here.
Alan Frabitz.
Here.
Michael Rossi.
Here.
Edward Alvarino. Pamela Fritz. Here is. Oh, I didn't see you, I'm sorry. Christine Gupil. Here. Mike Hanson. John May.
Here.
James Staunton. Maurice Kirkcar.
Present.
Timothy Guerra.
Here.
Mark Artuano.
Here. Okay, I'd like to see Kurt Carr for Ed Alvarino and Tim Guerra for, who do we have next?
Mike Knudsen.
Mike Knudsen. And Mark for
James.
Staunton, James Staunton. Okay, this is how it's going to work. We have a, that's right, we need a notice of public hearing read by the secretary or clerk.
Legal notice of public hearing, February 3rd, 2014, 7 p.m. in the green room. The Clinton Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing on Monday, February 3rd, 2014, at 7 p.m. in the green room of the Andrews Memorial Town Hall, 54 East Main Street, Clinton, Connecticut, to consider the following. 1. AR 13-234, petition to amend zoning regulations, Jeffrey M. and Patricia Cashman, Section 1, Title and Jurisdiction, Section 3, Definitions, Section 24.1, Residential Schedule of Uses regarding farm uses. At the said hearing, all persons will have the right to be heard and written communications received. The text of the proposed amendment is available for public inspection in the town clerk's office and the land use office of the Andrews Memorial Town Hall, Clinton Planning and Zoning Commission. This was Anselmo De Leon, chairman. It was emailed to the Harbor News to appear 2 times, Thursday, January 23rd, 2014, and Thursday, January 30th, 2014.
Okay, thank you, Mike. As you've heard, we are here to consider an application to amend, a petition to amend the zoning regulations by Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman. Is there any correspondence that we haven't circulated on the table that should be done?
Okay, we have correspondence list 1 received through February 3rd, 2014. There's the January 13, 2014 letter from Christopher Traw, Chairman, South Central Connecticut Regional Planning Commission. January 24th, 2014 letter from David M. Royston, Zallo Pickett and Allen PC. January 28th, 2014 letter from J.H. Torrance Downs, Rivercog. January 31st, 2014 memo from Thomas W. Lane, CEO. February 3rd, 2014 letter from Cindy F. Modino, Connecticut Water Company. January 30, 2014 letter from Joan Nichols, Connecticut Farm Bureau. January 27, 2014 letter from Janice Isle Mayor, Regional Agricultural Council. I probably butchered that one. February 3rd, 2014 letter from Carol Szymanski, Deep and Oslip. And February 3rd, 2014 email from Vincent Semino.
Thank you, Mike. I started to say, the way it's going to work is the applicant or his agent or their agent is going to make a presentation on the application. Thereafter, I'm going to ask the people that are in favor of the application to speak in favor, followed by those that may be opposed to the application to speak in opposition to the application. Then we're going to hear general comments from the audience. The commission will have its own comments and questions, and then a rebuttal from the applicant. I want to thank you all tonight for coming out. I know it's a rough evening. I really debated whether or not we should proceed. I ultimately decided that we should. Given the attendance and the attendance by the commission members, I suppose that was a good idea. However, I want to make known that I anticipated that a lot of people might not be able to show up tonight, and therefore, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to ask for a motion to continue this public hearing to a date in the future as well, so that everybody that wanted to speak, either pro or against, will have that opportunity. Okay, having said that, is there an applicant or an agent for the applicant?
Yes.
Sir, come forward, identify
Thank
yourself.
you. Good evening. I'm attorney Ed Cassella from Old Saybrook, representing Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman. I prepared a package for each of you just to provide some information concerning the application and some background information. I think some of which is already in your packet, and some of which hopefully will enlighten you further on this application and the issues ahead of us. As you know, this Cashman's with their property has been a contentious situation over the past several years, and we understand this application for amendment to the zoning regulations is separate from any of the zoning enforcement issues or other issues that are going on outside. However, it leaves us in a bit of a predicament, because in a normal instance, and I've represented the Cashmans for only a few weeks in these matters, but in normal instances, coming to the commission with an amendment to the zoning regulations would normally undertake a dialogue with the zoning enforcement officer to try to get to the heart of what the issues are, to see if there can be consensus at the staff level, and then present it to the commission. For obvious reasons, that just wasn't practical in this instance in a lot of respects. And so we're kind of left in the, I'll call it a bit of an uncomfortable situation where we're just presenting you something without getting any feedback from your agent or your staff other than what he wrote on Friday. Fortunately, we have a change in circumstances slightly, and I appreciate the offer to continue the public hearing, because what my hope would be is after the discussion this evening, perhaps we can work with staff, work with Attorney Royston, addressing some of his comments, and perhaps come back with something that in part may address some, may not address some, and then have this commission be deciding on a more vetted application. This hasn't been vetted at all by staff level, where I'm sure most of the applications you have been. So that's just a bit of the background due to the unique circumstances of this application. Obviously, the intent of the application to amend the zoning regulation relates to this commission as its zoning arm handling of farms and farming in the town of Clinton. And in the package that I presented to you, I provided kind of a history of some of the zoning regulations as they've progressed since 1990 to the present day concerning farming. I've also provided some of the legal analysis and some of the law that relates to farming, so that you can have it specifically for your review this evening, and as the discussion moves forward, hopefully into next month. As you know, Clinton has a long history of being a farming community, and I think one of the major reasons that this application has come to the commission is to better define what's a farm and what is farming in agriculture, and make it more consistent with what's known as Public Act 490. PA 490 is a tax exemption. So the legislature sets up a system where it says to the tax assessors, if somebody has a farm, if they have forestry, or if they have open space, you can give them a tax exemption, because we as the state want to protect those lands and allow them to continue undeveloped. So over the past 40 years, developers come in and subdivide everything that they can buy, because farmers and people who own large tracts of land are getting taxed at a high rate, because it's taxed at the highest and best use. So PA 490 really provides a bit of the background of not only farms in Clinton, but also this application. Because historically, what's happened in the town of Clinton is a farmer, such as the Cashmans, would go down to the assessor's office, apply for a PA 490. The assessor would go out, inspect the farm, inspect the property, and say, yes, you get the tax discount on your property because you are a farm, or open space, or forestry. But obviously, in this instance, we're concerned mainly about farms. So Clinton right now has about 120 plus, per Mr. Cashman, farms that are existing in the town. That's a good number of farms, and as you know, most of them are located in the northern part of town where the R80 and the R120 zones are. So looking at the history of your zoning regulations provides a bit of history as to how farms have been regulated by the zoning office and how they've been defined. So the first thing that's most important is zoning permits were not required for farms until January 1st of 2012. Specifically, in your regulations, there's a provision under as of the last amendment, which you did before then, which I think was August of 2010, had an exclusion that said no zoning permit or certificate of occupancy is required for a nursery, truck garden, or farm when no building or other structure is to be established therein. So if somebody wants to set up a farm in 2009, they wouldn't need a zoning permit or a certificate of zoning compliance. What they would need is a certificate of zoning compliance for a building on the property or other structures on the property, as those terms are defined in your zoning regulations. So to make sure that the buildings comply with setbacks and coverage and gross floor area and all the other provisions that are applicable in your regulations. But from a pure use perspective, as of December 31st, 2011, somebody could set up a farm, and your regulations specifically said no zoning permit is required for a farm. So now we move, January 1, 2012 is a major change in the farming regulations for the town of Clinton, as you know. And two things happened. First, that provision was eliminated in the zoning permit section. And second, farms across the board were moved from permitted uses to special exception uses. So in all the zones, all the R10, the R15, the R20, all the zones, it became special exception use. So overnight, every farm in Clinton became legal non-conforming. That's the situation where we are today. So if you had a farm on December 31st, 2011, it was legal. January 1st, 2012, legal non-conforming. So that presents a lot of problems because you get into many legal issues concerning intensification versus enlargement, what's a legal intensification, what's an illegal enlargement or expansion. And if you've been involved in litigation regarding non-conforming uses, you know there aren't clear lines. So that's a bit of the background for the regulation change. And we thought one of the first steps was to try to bring the definition of farming in line with the Connecticut General Statute's definition of agriculture and farming, which is found in General Statute 11Q. And it's interesting because I've read most of the correspondence that's come in from the regional planning agencies and Attorney Royston. And everybody kind of says, look, there's a pretty comprehensive definition in the General Statutes 11Q. And I didn't draft this regulation, and I don't take any particular ownership of it. But you know that seems to you could achieve a lot of consistency by going to the state statute and saying, look, this is what the assessor is looking at as a farm when she decides what's applicable under PA 490, and perhaps it should be what the zoning commission is looking at as a farm operation when they are considering whether to grant, depending on how we end up, a permit, special exception site plan for farm operation. Okay, so that's number one, is trying to make consistent the definitions between what's in Clinton zoning regulations and what is in the state statute. The Attorney Royston brings up in his letter, and again, my hope is to have some time to be able to vet these items with your substitute zoning enforcement officer and Attorney Royston. But what's the difference between farm and farming and agriculture? And you have two different definitions for farm and farming, and we propose a definition for agriculture. But you know, certainly there could be something worked out so that there is consistency and you don't need to change the regulations moving forward. the general statutes 1.1Q says farming, in agriculture are, I just want to make sure I'm right about that, are defined as follows. So I think that is the logical, that's the logical conclusion of, yeah, agriculture and farming. And then you could define farm, you could similarly, per Attorney Royston's comments, define farm so that it's consistent with the use, okay? Again, a lot of this is just for background, and you know, we're pleased to answer any specific questions that you have. The other major provision of the proposed regulation is the definition of farm operation. And it's again, trying to further define, perhaps in a way that goes a bit beyond what is the definition of farming and agriculture in the state statute. What's allowed on a farm? Okay, now you have a farm operation, you have a farm, and you're farming. What's allowed? And you know, this is the provision where standards could be set up. A lot similar to a lot of the other standards that you have set up for accessory apartments, hotels, many other things where you say, okay, this use is allowed, but if you want it, now you have to meet these specific standards. And there are standards currently in your zoning regulations for things like livestock, keeping them in certain buildings or enclosures. So the intent of the farm operation section was in large part to work with the commission to impose reasonable standards on farm operations. The second general statute that I provided in the package is meant to provide a bit of guidance, and that is General Statutes 19A 341. And that's known as the right to farm law. Okay, and that's another important consideration when you are considering not only this application to amend, but just considering the development of farms in general in the town of Clinton. And basically it says, again, there's a public policy to protect farms and to keep them viable because they're up against many hurdles that I'm sure you're going to hear about later in more detail than I can elaborate. And just because there's a farm activity going on, there isn't a nuisance. The Department of Agriculture has set up standards, and the law, the state statute basically says no farm is a nuisance unless you go beyond the standards that are acceptable to the Department of Agriculture. Okay? And when the zoning enforcement matters, for example, with Mr. Cashman came down, Mr. Cashman invited the Department of Agriculture to visit his farm, and I provided with you an example letter of the Department of Agriculture's review concerning his farm operation. So there is a body that does already govern and is in place to review the activities of farms throughout the state. And I think it took 10 weeks, maybe with a little extra added red tape that probably wasn't necessary and delays from the time he contacted them to the time they got the report back. So it is something that is viable. And what we're proposing as part of the amendment is farms, again, we can work with the zoning commission on standards, but they're not going to be a nuisance, because they can't be under the general statutes, unless they go beyond what's reasonable for a farm in pursuit to the Department of Agriculture. And then finally, the last provision is the quantification of what's the use farm, what is it subject to? Again, previously it had been subject, it was permitted. It was a permitted use, and in January 1, 2012, it became subject only to special exception. I think our position on that is, certainly in a lot of areas of town, the smaller zones, the smaller residential zones, R10, the R15, those zones probably appropriate to keep the special exception designation because of the small nature of the lot. But up in the R80 and in areas where Mr. Cashman has 3 acres, which has always been the minimum number of acres for a farm, it not be a special exception. It continued to be a permitted use as it was in prior to the amendments in December in 2012. So that's a brief outline of the application that we submitted. And again, I provided some supporting materials to you to try to highlight some of the ideas and the concepts that are applicable. And you know, we invite any questions that you have or any comments that you have, and we appreciate your indulgence in continuing this to the next month, hopefully, and you know, ask that you look favorably upon it and approve the application ultimately.
Thank you. So you concluded your remarks for now?
For now.
You reserve the right to rebut.
Of course. Mr. Cashman, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would.
If that's okay with the chair.
That's okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
I would just caution you, counsel, to advise your client not to discuss the subject matter that's in litigation.
Absolutely.
That would be inappropriate.
I agree.
I understand. I'm more than I'd like to thank the opportunity for you folks to be able to come in front of the commission and to talk about what's normal standard practices for farming. Today, the farming world it's gotten very high tech with green technologies, with GMOs, with all kinds of technologies that are changing daily. There's an opportunity for farmers to be able to look at different markets that are available. Those markets, when you got into a farm 25 years ago, you looked at what markets were available for you to work within your farm. This one Q1 that we're asking you to honor, it didn't seem like there was any, when you look at the words zoning compliance, you looked at, you had those rights to look at the whole list through the assessor's office, which is very detailed from the state of Connecticut, and you thought that within those rights you were allowed to run your farm within those rights of that very high-tech definition. Today, to be able to rely on the Department of Agriculture, the DEP, every state agency that you can actually imagine, the technicalities of what people are doing today are way past most realms of comprehension. Today, if you were to ask most people about raising beef or raising eggs or something that might be organic or what might be normal farming procedures, there's an automatic ignorance because our farming is getting so small every day. What we've asked you folks to do, which is really probably in a very smart instance, is be able to use on a reach-out basis the Department of Agriculture, the Department of DEP, all those state agencies to make sure that your farming is regulated to a very high degree, okay? Because we were allowed 25 years ago, and I believe the zoning regulation said as a matter of right, we were given that right, we were given that approval through not only a zoning enforcement officer, but a commission that approved and looked at our situation out there, and we've been working very hard for 25 years on this piece of property. When we look at what's agricultural, and when I look at what is farming, we have to reflect back that farming is a business. It is a business no different than any other farm that's in here in the state of Connecticut or no other farm. There's nothing free that goes out on a farm, okay? There's a profitability, there's an expense, there's a loss sheet, there's P&L statements, there's all kinds of things that go along with this farming entity. And you look at what's viable in a market. In flowers, you might say, well, this year, the floriculture, which you mentioned, that, the market for azaleas might be entirely different as opposed to rhododendrons, and you look at what those available markets are and you flourish with those markets. I think we could look at today and recognize that out west in this drought that there was major problems with beef and the raising of beef and all of these other issues to where farmers were losing their cattle left and right. And the prices of beef went absolutely nuts. Well, what that said to every farmer out everywhere else was raise that beef because there's going to be a demand for it. You're not going to raise a product if there isn't a demand for that product. Today, what I look at is the small farmer or the small person working in their garden that normally is raising one of the highest qualities of organic products that are out there. You almost have to agree that when you go into a supermarket and you bite in or you bring home a tomato home, you go, this just isn't like the neighbor that raises them next to me. And you understand markets, shipping. Today, so many different markets are out there that beef comes from Argentina. We think that maybe it must come from Texas, but there are those entities of different issues that people do when they're farming. And I brought those issues, one of those issues down today, and it's a piece of Clinton's history. This is what's all known to everybody as the milk box. Okay, this is Bert Airy. They left this on your front door. They brought you your milk in glass containers, brown glass containers, white glass containers. This man never owned a cow, but he took every farmer's milk and he brought it in, he processed it, he put it through his machines, he homogenized it, it was delivered by milkmen. It was a standard policy, but today, that was a farming entity that was popular today. And if I were to ask any one of you, where was this Bert Airy, it was where the Walgreens used to be many, many years ago. The pollution that was found on that property was because of issues that had to do with that farm. Today, we are very clean in a lot of things that we do. We're concerned about what are we doing with our product. What are those issues that are available in farming consistencies? I look at today, what we do is no different than other farms in our community. We look at our mulch business and what we do, and we realize that there are people like Clinton Nurseries that have a business that brings in an organic matter, ships it out, puts it in bags, and sends it to Home Depot. I look at all of those markets, no different than a very big business with Clinton Nurseries. We look at an issue where during our hurricane, they brought in all of that product. They processed it, they assembled it, they shipped it out the door. In your 1Q1 form, this very high-tech thing is processing. I can't think of any farm that doesn't process hay, doesn't process vegetables, doesn't process anything, and have a market when you're sitting there going, there's a fee and there's a profitability and a business. When we started this with Tom many years ago, 2 years ago, I believe, was our presentation to come in here, that we were saying to you folks, you've affected a business. You've affected our lives to a point where it's our livelihood. This 2-year battle has affected a business. We're simply asking very politely, in a manner tonight, we're not here to make our neighborhood go completely crazy. We're here to say that we do have a business. It was designed to be a business. Our farming capacity, whether we were working as landscapers, we were working as providing nursery stock, we were working in the industry. It's a tough, hard, seasonal work that we're doing all of our lives out there. I haven't left the property. I've been on the property. I've worked myself many hours late at night trying to maintain it in a specific way that looks like it's continually in the neighborhood of great respect, with flowers and mulch and making it look nice and respect in the community. We've tried to be good to our neighbors. We've tried, as farmers, we've tried to be able to share what we have with our community. We've been good to our neighbors. We've tried to be able to take the equipment that we do have, which is very expensive in your business. And when you're sitting there looking at, okay, 9 years ago, we looked at where was our market going, and we decided to buy a commercial Route 1 piece of property so that we could have an agricultural distribution area for a retail area here. This is what's really been affected really sadly, is that our business has been affected to where we're no longer allowed to have that Route 1 piece of property. It's been that devastating. I think it's sad that people don't realize that farmers are business people in a community. They're good, hard-working people. And that when you do these certain things of not really realizing that this is a business issue, that people professionally work very hard for a profitability. The profits aren't that big. As a one-man band or someone who's teaching my daughter agriculture, whether it be raising eggs, candling eggs, whether it be chickens, whether it be gestation periods, whether it be whatever those issues are of cleanliness on a farm, there is what's known as normal standard practices, and we've tried to maintain those with some of the highest degrees of standards because we are in a smaller area. We'd love to have a lot more property, but we just don't have that. Okay? For us in our small family operation, I think it's a great way to say that we can learn work ethic and a lot of other issues. We didn't invest in a community years ago in that farm capacity. We looked at what we could do on that piece of property and things according to your 1Q1 form. we've never strayed from that. That's been our guide, that's been our Bible, if I can say, of what we thought we were allowed to do on that property. It doesn't define whether you can or you can't. It says this is what the town is acceptable for farming. And that's what we're asking you today, is to, many years later, be able to recognize the farming capacity of what normal people do, and it is a business. Today, also, in your supermarkets, although this is old, this is something that is called Connecticut hen. This is an egg. This is an egg box that you buy, you walk in and buy a store today. Okay? And I look at it, you look at it, you see Connecticut hens. Okay, it doesn't say anything about Connecticut, it doesn't say anything, it says all the hens in Connecticut. I wanted to challenge you also tonight that, who is participating in these eggs? Who's participating in that milk? Who's participating in the agricultural part of it, that a business now takes small entities of small people and takes it and makes it large enough to be able to do distribution of it? Okay, so the farmer would take his jugs, those metal jugs of milk, take them to Bird Dairy, and he would be paid for his gallons of milk. No different than someone would take 100 dozen eggs to somebody and get paid for those. Today, what we have is something very popular, is Connecticut grown. It's a market, it's right here on here, Connecticut grown. Right? And look at what's Connecticut grown. What is not? Christmas trees are marketed Connecticut grown, strawberries are Connecticut grown, well, so is the lumber that's out there, so is the mulch that's out there, it's all Connecticut grown. It's a very high-tech world.
Mr. Cashman, I'm going to interrupt you for a
Yeah.
second. I don't want to seem impolite or rude,
Yep.
but I would like to stick to the application at hand.
I did, I just wanted
You're very
to...
passionate about your
Yep.
business, and I don't
Sure.
blame you. In fact,
Yep.
I commend you for being passionate.
Yep.
But what we have before us as a commission is an application to amend our regulations, and we need to know...
That's why I'm asking this commission
Let him speak.
to use the 1Q1 form, because we have built a business on it.
Mr. Cashman,
Thank you.
You are going beyond that, though, and I just want to let you know that while I appreciate your passion about this, I have to be mindful of what our role is as a commission. And I am here to make sure that we all understand that we have a proposed amended set of regulations. And I'm concerned about how those regulations will impact the rest of the town, not you particularly, but the rest of the town. That's our job, that's our mission. We have a plan of conservation and development, we have to be consistent with it. I'd like to hear at some point, after I hear from the folks, how all of this fits with what we have before us as a task, okay?
Very good.
Again, I don't mean to be
I
impolite
appreciate
or
it,
rude.
appreciate it. Yep.
I'm
I just
letting
thought
you know.
I wanted to speak, that's all.
Okay, and one thing I want to mention, Mr. Cassella, is your name does not appear on the application. We have another attorney's name.
Right.
I suggest you file an amended application to include your name or to substitute your name.
And I did on a cover letter, I did put a sentence that I'm currently acting as agent for Jeffrey and Patricia Cashman regarding this application. I don't know if you need anything further.
Yeah,
Is that sufficient?
I can submit it amended.
You can just come up
Sure.
right on this one.
Mrs. Leah, I would like to offer my support in your position, and that I understand that Mr. Cashman has some issues with the town, and that I understand that this is an application as well that is before us concerning, and how it will affect the entire town. I support your position just for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to now hear from you folks that are in favor of this application in any manner you wish, but again, I want to caution you, the weather is not ideal. I don't want to stay here until midnight hearing the same thing over and over again. Again, I don't want to be impolite, cut anybody short, but if you're going to say, I am in favor because I love Mr. Cashman, and then somebody else says the same thing, that's really not going to be part of what we find helpful to our deciding how it impacts the town. But I do encourage you to speak out, so anybody that wants to speak in favor of the application, please rise, state your name, and make your point. Just, I don't want it to be too cumulative, everybody's saying the same thing over and over. Well, we'll get the gist of it. Okay? Go ahead, sir.
Michael Massey, Harbor Parkway, Clinton. I came to town in the 60s. I was a police officer for 28 years. I'm a fireman for over 40. Mr. Cashman's farm, that piece of property dates back to when I was a young boy. And as an officer and a fireman, we had a shoot-in there. And at that time, there was plenty of animals all over the entire neighborhood. Anywhere you go in Clinton, there's chickens, there's cows, there's pigs, you name it, it's there. I enjoy going there, I bring my girlfriend's grandkids, we feed the animals, he lets them go take some eggs out. His daughter teaches the little kids about the farm. I think it's a great thing. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else in favor? Yes.
Yeah, Peggy, Adler, 5 Oakland Street. So long as there's no negative impact that the commission finds to the people in the town in general, I think that the amendment should be passed.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else to speak in favor? I'll say it one more time. Anyone else here to speak in favor of the application? Yes, sir.
My name is Ebit Whitcomb. I've known Mr. Cashman for some time, but observed this discussion about his farm. And I think that one must consider grandfathering. Apparently he's been in business for a long time doing those things, and as you say, the amount of farming has diminished, but it seems to me he's earned the place that needs to be recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in favor? Anyone in opposition? Yes, sir. Come forward. State your name.
Hi, my name is Brien. I live on River Road. I think this change will not positively affect any of the property on River Road. I think, in fact, it will negatively affect it. The current property is loud with machines running on weekends, on Sundays, and it really is a real nuisance to the area. Not dealing with the smelly cows or stuff like that. One of the things that's really important is River Road is a rural road. It has no shoulders and it's very narrow. During the summer, there's a campground up there.
Sir,
Okay.
I think, just hear me out, okay, and then I'll let you continue.
Sure.
What we have before us is a zone change application.
Right.
We are not focusing in on one single property, even though you may have some.
No, but my point
How do
is,
you oppose the application as it pertains to these changes that are being sought for the entire town?
I think what happens is you have to look at road usage. That if you open up a farm that allows people to buy and sell things on the farm, you bring additional trucks and cars back and forth. And on that road, that's a real problem. That's my point. I am concerned about the waste that's processed on the farm. I saw in the documentation that if it doesn't affect the private wells, it's not an issue. The only thing is also what happens if Mr. Cashman leaves. What happens to that property? Does this variance last for that forever?
It's not a variance.
It's not a variance.
It's not a variance, it's an application to change the zone that would impact all R80 zones to some degree, and this is what we're trying to find out. What is the impact of the change if we were to adopt it as proposed?
You have in River Road, really, when you say already, that's 2 acres,
3 acres plus.
3 acres. Most of River Road is
2 acres?
probably
I'm
1
sorry, it is
acre
2
or
acres.
less. In our area, that area is 1 acre or less for most of the houses. It's not like we all have big pieces of property there. We're a pretty tight road in terms of the number of houses. Some houses have a little more, but most of them don't. And that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition to this application to amend the regulations? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Borsniack, and I live on the road across the street from Cashman's. And I was reading the reasons for the application for...
Ma'am, could you speak up or come forward, because we have a recorder here to tape everything that's being said. Would you mind either speaking up or coming closer?
The petition for the amended regulations. This is going to affect all the R80 properties, is that correct?
It would.
Okay, so if they're allowed to have mulch and compost that also means it's a commercial business, which is manure or whatever, leaves, manure will be brought in from off-site. That's going to be brought in on that property. That's going to affect my property value. Also, livestock, I'd like to know how many livestock would he be able to have on that property, on that small piece of property that he has available right now.
That would have a bearing on the litigation that's pending, not on the application, so I am not going to answer that question for you.
But I also want you to reconsider that for compost, and that's going to have a big effect on all the homes in that area, between the smell and the heavy equipment going in and out of there. So I object to it.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else opposed? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Veronica Lopez. I live with Mr. Cashman's, and I oppose this because the farm itself is very smelly, very dirty. There's a lot of traffic, a lot of heavy trucks going in and out all day, dumping the wood chips. He's running this equipment constantly, every day.
Ma'am, you heard me make the comments earlier with other people, both pro and con, right?
Right.
We can't focus on his use on his property as it impacts you next door or down the street. This is an application for a zone change that impacts the entire R80 district
Well,
in
this
this
would
entire
impact
town.
everybody because of the noise and the smell.
If I may help, Mr. D'Elia, in essence, the question should be phrased in the sense that how would truck traffic or the change in zone increase the potential truck traffic for the neighborhood, for the R80 zone, regardless of any individual property? Would this increase truck traffic or not? Is that your question? Is that what you're asking?
Because if he did not have the most powerful...
Not he.
Well,
Would that increase
yes,
truck traffic?
It would. Look,
Mr. Manning, that's a fair point, and I'm going to reiterate it, and I take advantage of the fact that I happen to be the chairman, and I want to direct this hearing in a proper manner. We need to stick to the issue at hand. The issue at hand is a proposed zoning change that would impact all R80 properties in town. So what I'd like to hear, either pro or against, how that would be beneficial to all R80 properties, residential 80 properties, which I believe are 2 acres and up, and why it would be advantageous or why it would not be advantageous. We've done the part where it would be advantageous, and we heard very specific things about Mr. Cashman. I would like to hear how the public feels about changing it as it impacts all R80 zones. In other words, does it impact...
River Road.
I'm sorry?
At River Road with all the traffic coming in.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just giving you a suggestion as to how to frame your concerns in opposition to this application. I don't want to focus on the individual, his property, or necessarily your property. I want to focus it in a broader way, because this is a broader issue that we have before us. The broader issue is, with his application tonight, he's seeking to change all R80 properties to allow certain farm uses. And is that a good idea or a bad idea? That's what we have to decide as a commission. So we'd like to hear from you, because you're in essence giving us evidence of why it's a good idea and why it's a bad idea. I mean, I don't think there's anybody here that is against farms. It's a question of what the impact to the town of Clinton would be if we changed our 80 zones to allow for what this proposal envisions. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, but he was allowed to present that he invited the Department of Agriculture to come in and inspect his property. He also invited, no, I want to speak my mind. He also invited Mr. Alvarino to inspect his wood pile up there, and he still has not complied with what Mr. Alvarino wrote as it being a fire hazard.
Man, you're misunderstanding what we're trying to do here tonight as a commission. What you're speaking to is pending litigation that I can't talk
No,
about.
I'm just trying to present how he brought the Department of Agriculture in. He also invited the fire marshal in. And he hasn't complied with the recommendations of the fire marshal.
How does that impact R80 and the rest of Clinton, ma'am?
It's a fire hazard. Even he said it was a fire hazard.
I'm not arguing with you. It's a fire hazard with respect, if it is or it isn't, it would be with respect to that individual property, not the entire R80 district.
No, but to River Road, doesn't that count for anything?
It does count for something, but I am more concerned about hearing from the public why this proposed regulatory change is a good idea or a bad idea. You can talk about how it would impact traffic. You can talk about how it would impact everybody in R80 adversely because they're going to have pigs, they're going to have cows, they're going to have compost. You can talk about that all you like, but you can't talk about his individual case that's pending in a court of law, or how it impacts you with that individual case that's pending in a court of law. Do you follow me? That's improper.
Well, I object.
Thank
I
you.
don't understand.
Mr. Chairman, I believe this farm change would be more than R80, wouldn't it?
No, it's just R80? It's just R80.
R80.
That's
All
it.
R80 properties are affected.
I would caution all commissioners to reserve questions and comments till we're done with the public commentary, okay? Anyone else opposed to this application to change regulations that would impact the R80 district in the town of Clinton?
I would like to rephrase my comments within the framework that you're trying to present them. What I would like to have you consider is that if I live in an R80 zone, and it's basically residential, I don't have any sense of security.
It's not basically, it is residential.
It is residential. I don't have the security then of realizing that maybe the person down the street or my neighbor could flip their residence over to a farm.
If this change goes into effect.
If that change goes into effect. So from that point of view, I would say as a property owner anywhere in town, that type of uncertainty as to the property use in my neighborhood, wherever that neighborhood is, be it the R80, creates an economic uncertainty to me that I would not personally want to expose myself to, knowing what's going on and what could happen.
Anyone else? Opposed? If not, I will open it up to the commission members to ask questions and make comments. I'm all ears.
May I? I had a couple just quick things. It may change because I appreciate that you're going to go over and look at the comments that we have and adjust between now and next month. So maybe what I'm saying is going to be redundant, but I was a little concerned about how the idea of bringing in material from off-site for processing fits in with our town plan. And also the fact that I know from previous applications for doing processing of off-site material from mulch, that requires a special DEP permit, but my concern is, is this really consistent with what our town plan of conservation and development has? That one little section. And once I get done, I'll let you respond, but I wanted to say that. Also, I was confused about the statement about setbacks that you had. And again, this is something that I know that was mentioned by Royston, so it may be something you're fixing anyway, but what I caught is a little bit strange was that it mentions the front and side yard setbacks, it doesn't discuss the rear, simple things like that. And I also was concerned about why there's the arbitrary date, in my mind, maybe being a little drunk, of 1990. It would seem that if we're going to set a date, it should have been closer to when the regulations changed. Again, that's my bias, but that's, I didn't quite understand that. I'll leave those as my questions, and I'll let you answer.
Prior to doing so, I'd like to add that I disagree with Mr. Michael Rossy's statements of bias or arbitrary, but simple curiosity as to what your intent was.
Understand.
Thank you.
So I'm a little strong.
Let me start from the last ones, because those are, I would tend to agree with you that the history of the zoning is, as I've suggested it is this evening. Is it okay if I remain seated?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. That perhaps January 1, 2012 is the date where there really seems to be the switch from legal to non-conforming subject to special permit. So in existence prior to January 1, 2012 is, for today's discussion, I would agree with you that makes sense. Number one. Number two, I think with respect to the front and side yard, and I don't know if I can pull it up. I think that was attempting to mirror the current regulations regarding livestock and no, okay, it's just a legal setback. The current regulations regarding, sorry, I'll fill you in on my thought process here. The current regulations regarding livestock say that, as they were amended in January of 2012, no livestock, or basically chickens, and you can see this in my memo 26.1.4, shall be in an enclosure. Enclosure comes up for the first time in 2012 for cows and things, but within the setbacks. Okay, all setbacks, legal setbacks is what it says. So there isn't any distinction between side and front. I had in my mind that might have been where it came from. Again, that's something we can certainly consider is whether adding rear setbacks makes sense. And what we'd probably do is take a look at some of the existing farms in the R80 zone and determine who's in their rear. And but I think I agree with you that if there's a residential property on the side, no setback there. You need the setback there. If there's a residential property in the rear, you need the setback there, and then perhaps in the front.
And the language says yard, not setback.
Maybe I'm looking at an old version.
But like I said, that was something that I'm hoping you're just going to be adjusting as you go through this.
Yeah, and then I think the first piece, hopefully I haven't forgotten any, is the question regarding processing of mulch, basically. And there's a few answers to that. The first is, to a certain extent, the processing of wood materials and other materials into mulch is regulated by the DEEP, but not the first, if it's the processing, my understanding, of the first cut. So you're able to cut, make into mulch with no DEEP permits necessary. Beyond that, first grind, you're able to, Mr. Cashman can probably explain that better than I can, some of the nuances. And I think with respect to the bringing in materials from off-site, it's Mr. Cashman, I think, addressed that specific provision in his statements, which was, this is something that is traditionally done in farms. If you're telling farmers they can't bring in seeds to plant them, they're bringing in something off-site and they're planting them. You know, you have to make your own seeds. If you don't make them and plant them, you can't do that. So, that's typically something that's done on farms, the dairy farms, they would bring in milk. The distributors of the eggs would bring in eggs, as Mr. Cashman alluded to. So I think that's the rationale behind the provision concerning the mulch. Thank you.
Anyone else, comments or questions?
If This question about R90 and not R90, I see the R90 reference.
R80 or R90?
R80, I'm sorry, R80 in 24-1-.44 on page 3. Other than that, are these other provisions that are in here do not seem to be restricted? I mean, are you restricting this to R80? Is that your intent?
Currently, the zoning regulations state that farms and farm uses and nurseries and truck gardens, as these things are defined in your regulations, are subject to special permit in all of those zones. So the only change that we're requesting is for it to be permitted as of right in the R80, still subject to special exception in all the other zones. So it leaves a lot of the protections just in the northern, your R80 zone is the northern part of town. In that, where the acreage is larger, there's a lot more parcels of land that are currently farms. I question how many new farms will be coming into the town of Clinton due to the economics of farming these days, but certainly it's meant to, and I think this, if I can take this opportunity to make one comment of a bit of rebuttal, because it kind of brings in Mr. Cashman's statements. But what you're doing here is you're balancing the, because of the economic uncertainty, the regulation over farms. All the farms now in Clinton are non-conforming. And is that what this commission wants? Do they want farmers to be under the microscope of legal non-conformity, which is a very, very slippery slope, considering what's legal expansion, or what's legal intensification? If you get an extra cow, is that a legal intensification or is that an enlargement? These are, Attorney Royston and I have litigated a few expansion versus intensification of nonconformities, and it is not clear in a lot of instances. But that's what you've invited upon yourselves in terms of all of these farms. So it's an added burden to the farms in the R80 zone. Anything they do, their neighbors can come and say, that's an illegal expansion. And now we're stuck in a situation that is only lawyers make out. So that's and I think that's part of the reason why we're here, is by allowing it to continue to be a permitted use, you're not making all those farms non-conforming.
But Mr. Cassella, Attorney Cassella, are you then not creating a situation where someone decides to do a compost facility on a 5-acre or 3-acre R80 property next to a guy that's there with his kids and just basically living there as a residence, which is what an R80 is? How would that situation impact that individual who's there as a residence, who bought that property as a residence, who expected to have that property as a residence in perpetuity, while his neighbor has now decided to conduct a compost business, I'm not going to call it a factory, with all its attendant ramifications, and or conduct an intensive livestock operation which has attendant pollution type issues given the manure and impact on the water table? Should we not be concerned about that individual who's there strictly on a residential basis along with 10, 15 other neighbors?
No.
How would you address that?
I think you should. In the first way to address it is the Department of Agriculture is going to be concerned with that. And somebody asked the question, how many livestock can you have on this property earlier? And I think the answer is, how many is commercially reasonable, or reasonable in light of the standards that are set up in the Department of Agriculture. They're the ones who have all the expertise to govern what is reasonable, what isn't reasonable for farm uses. That's, as Mr. Cashman alluded to, there is quite a moving target with respect to farming, what is farming, and the operations that farms are undertaking these days.
Well, I'm very concerned about that moving target. I mean, who are we to say to Mr. X or Mrs. Y, who's there in a house, a residence, with 2 kids, 1 kid, no kids, minding his business, cutting his lawn, and all of a sudden next door, there's a compost operation, or there's a pig farm. because it falls under 1.1 parentheses Q. Where do we have any say as a zoning board with respect to that if we implement the changes you're proposing?
Part of the discussion was the implementation of reasonable standards. Okay, reasonable standard.
You've removed the special permit aspect.
We've removed the
to
special
R80.
permit, but we've still imposed the standards.
But the standards are wide open.
Well, but that's what we could fine tune to try to close any loopholes that exist.
Well, they're not loopholes, Mr. Cassella.
Well,
Under the law, under what the Department of Agriculture feels the law should be. But we in Clinton are not necessarily concerned about what the Department of Agriculture thinks. We're concerned about what the town of Clinton wants or needs for its entire population within the R80 district. I think you can appreciate that.
Of course I can.
Mr. Chairman, prior to moving on to Mr. Cashman, there's a gentleman in the back from the public.
Well,
Who's
the
raising
problem
his
is, they had their turn from the public.
Just
It is
saying,
not- it is not a
did I
commission.
recognize there's a gentleman in the back that raised his
I saw his hand go up, but, we'll go back for general comments in the end, sir, if you don't mind waiting. Not
Thank you,
only that,
Mr.
but I'm going to ask that this
Thank you.
hearing be continued, and there will be plenty of other opportunities to speak, either pro or con, or general comments in the future. I just don't want to belabor the point, I just want to have some of my questions answered, because I have to answer, or I should say we as a commission answer to a lot more people than one applicant. We are going to have to answer to an entire R80 district, and I suspect people don't fully appreciate what this means. And I'm trying to bring it out as part of my duty as chairman of this commission. So, anybody else have any specific questions? I've asked Mr. Rossi asked a question about the 1990 date. That was also one of my questions. The answer has reasonably satisfied me. But I was going to ask you if you know how many of these farm operations or farms exist in the entire R80 district at the moment that are quote-unquote non-conforming.
I don't know the specific answer to that in terms of how many are in R80 versus other parts of town. So my understanding is that there's approximately 120 in town.
That seems excessive to me. I don't know if you have any statistics.
Operating farms, is that what he's referring to, operating farms?
There's 121 agricultural, you can ask Mr. Elliott, there's 121 registered in the clerk's office, 121 agricultural PA 490 pieces of property in the town of Clinton. There are.
I believe if you look at comments,
I looked at Tom Lloyd's comments and I saw 20 or so.
at approximately 20 potential properties that would be affected by this change in just the R80 zone itself.
Okay.
That was just off the top of his head, kind of a,
Well,
going
the
through.
R80 is what we're really concerned with.
so that's,
Okay.
If I may ask two questions.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Sir, your field of expertise as an attorney is
Land use.
land use expertise? All right.
You know, I have a general practice, I do real estate law, I do some litigation, we do personal injury law, I do evictions, but I do a lot of land use work in towns of Old Saybrook and Westbrook. I represent the Old Line Planning Commission, I represent the Old Line Wetlands Commission. I've done a lot of work in Essex recently, so.
Okay, in your experience with, without rephrasing or trying to restate the chairman's question concerning the use of the property, you went on to discuss something about the livestock on the property, and I want to readdress the issue, if I may. The idea of production and/or processing of materials within a given property according to the state's mandate of what is farm use. Now, that being said, to phrase this question specifically, there is a certain amount of farm use domestic material produced by a farm, we'll say, for instance, a dairy farm, manure. You're going to have manure on a dairy farm, this is a given. Now, you're going to compost that within sight on that dairy farm. You're not going to truck in additional manure from another dairy farm, especially considering the environmental impacts of that property housing a certain number of head of cows to produce milk. Okay. Now, that being said, with the idea of having what's determined as a farm use beyond the process of material contained within the farm, you mentioned seeds. Seeds you purchase to beget plants that are produce of the farm. This is understood. However, when you're talking about the processing of plant materials, tree stumps, tree growth, storm refuse, I mean, just waste material is brought onto a piece of property, in what way does that relate to farm use specifically as non-production environment where you're processing material beyond the limits of the farm? Please explain.
Well, I would take a look at the definition, the 11Q definition, which says that agriculture and farming shall include the production of any agricultural commodity, to paraphrase a bit. The processing, delivering to storage or to market any agricultural commodity. So those are some definitions, those are some applications.
Is that the state's definition of
This is
the processing of materials?
That I'm reading from General Statutes 11-Q, which is the state's definition of farming.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, what I'm reading is, it's the cultivation of soil, dairy, forestry, raising or harvesting any agricultural
And I paraphrase
commodity,
it. I'm sorry.
including, and then it goes on to say, or salvaging timber or cleared land or brush or other debris left by a storm as incident to such farming operations.
As incident to such farming operation, does it show or declare any instance of importing materials to the farming operation? The farming operation, I assume, is defined as the borders of the property defined as the farm. Please continue.
And then the next sentence, if you look at the semicolon,
Right.
is where I was reading from. So after incident to such farming operations continues the production, okay, or harvesting of maple syrup or maple sugar, or any agricultural commodity, including lumber, as incident to the farming operation, okay?
As incident to the farming operation.
Okay.
What does that mean, as incident to the farming operation? Because that's what I really want to understand.
As part
Does that
of the
mean
farming
defined
operation.
within the properties or boundaries of the farm? Or does that designate by the state importation of any product to the farm? That's what I want to know.
Our position is,
I'm asking him, sir.
our position is that as long as it's an agricultural commodity that's being processed, it's incident to the farming operation. It's including importing. That's our position.
Very well, thank you for your response.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners?
I think, didn't Mr. Royston ask for a clarification of something? Did we get that clarification?
Well, there are several clarifications he's looking for. Attorney Cassella has indicated his willingness to work within the comments made by our attorney in his letter, 4-page letter. I want to specifically, Mr. Cassella, now that you brought it up, Mr. Carr, Mr. Cassella, I want to specifically have you address, since you appear to have Mr. Royston's comments.
I do.
Okay, page 4. As presently constructed, with your proposed regulation doesn't seem to clarify the pre-existing use exemption. In that last paragraph, the first sentence, Mr. Royston says, I recommend that any pre-existing use exemption only apply to legally existing operations as of the date of the adoption of the proposed regulation. So in other words, if there are prior non-conforming operations that would be illegal today, they're not allowed in the future.
Yeah,
What say you to that?
It's an interesting concept, because I think that's actually a more liberal approach than what I had previously discussed with Mr. Rossi, which is setting.
You mean tonight?
Tonight, yeah. When he asked me about the 1990 date versus, and I said, you know what, January 1, 2012 is probably a better date because of the change in the regulations upon that date. It might, just thinking out loud here, if it pleases you, but it may not matter, because if the farm started on January 26, 2012, it was illegal, because it didn't have a special exception. So it may not matter whether or not to put in a date, is what I'm saying. It was legal if it was on December 31st, 2011. If you didn't have a special exception, you can't have started one since then. So the date, I'm kind of coming around, I guess, to his comment, may not matter. I've already moved it to 2012. If we want to eliminate it altogether, I don't think I would be adverse to that. Of course, I reserve any to reconsider it, but.
Okay.
Can I verify the date of 1990, why that's there, and answer your question?
Well, confer with your lawyer, you can.
Yeah, we'll talk about that after.
Agreed.
Any other questions to the commission? If not, I would entertain a motion to continue this to a date in the future.
Do you want to have general comments? I think it was somebody here.
No, from the commission, are there any other general comments?
No, I mean, from the people, visitors,
Sir, back there, I'm going to give you this chance.
You
here.
mentioned the thing about the guy playing in the yard and living next to a farm. Well, that's great. Well, how about on the other side where the guy has an organic farm and he's got his neighbor over there spraying Chemlon all over his lawn? You know, it could work on both sides. I don't have a registered farm, but I do farm. I have chickens, I have turkeys, and I have a huge vegetable garden, and I have an orchard. And what I'm doing is I'm playing around to see where I want to go with it. Now, I'm not looking to make money, but I have 4 kids to feed, and it helps with the grocery bill. So this whole thing, and I don't know about Mr. Cashman's deal, I don't know anything about that, but I'm here because I have enough acreage to register as a farm, but maybe, I don't know if I want it. Okay? So my point is that, you know, everybody wants to buy the farmhouse, but they don't want to hear a rooster crowing in the background. You know? Some people live like that. I grow my own vegetables, I grow my own fruit. You know, we eat the eggs on my house, with my chickens. Occasionally we eat a chicken.
Sir, I don't think the present regulations interfere with your use. We're only concerned about how it would impact.
Well, it did impact me one day.
I'm not here to argue with you.
Okay.
I'm just trying to explain to you what our concerns are, or what I think our concerns are. What the changes imply for the town of Clinton, and more specifically, the R80 district. And what I seem to be hearing, and what 11D, the regulation with the definition from the state, seems to be saying is, it would allow for a permitted use over a wide range of activities, not just growing a couple of chickens and a few eggs.
Well, I'm hearing
and
about
some
the importing the
vegetables.
tree stumps and this and that. I mean, you gotta import hay. You gotta, you know, I don't have a pasture where I can make my own hay.
Right, but I just want you to understand what we're here concerned about. You understand what I'm
Yeah, I
saying?
understand what you're saying.
Okay. We're not here to prevent you from having a vegetable patch or a couple of chickens if you're within the right district, which is presently allowed. I'm concerned about a big compost pile, perhaps in some neighbor's yard, that's going to present a fire hazard, an environmental hazard, because the stuff seeps into the underground water sources.
Well,
The Connecticut Water Company has expressed some concerns. These are the things that we need to get clear before we decide. That's another reason we're going to continue this public hearing, if somebody will so move tonight.
I will agree to you after one statement. where you were concerned with rather organic or non-organic farming, okay, in a general statement, just in general, from my understanding, would it affect an organic farm to have materials brought in from unregulated sources? Just for, say,
Okay.
composting, whatever, like you said, pesticides or whatever, I don't know what was sprayed in a number of pile of leaves that were brought in to compost in a adjoining property to your own. I mean, would that affect you negatively or positively in regards to the change in this regulation?
Well, I can tell you, I don't buy hay that's been sprayed with pesticides or herbicides. Because that, when I do compost my manure, you need a carbon to break down the nitrogen, because all that feces is nitrogen. So you need a carbon added to it. That's what breaks it down. I don't, the stuff I do my research. I don't buy GMO seeds. I don't buy, stuff that's been sprayed with herbicides and pesticides. So, that, I don't know if that answers your question.
That does, and so in a final response,
But you
what
have
I'm
to find
looking
it.
for from you is, would it benefit you positively or negatively if we were to allow a regulation to be set into place that would basically open the floodgates, perhaps? Would you be happy with that change?
Floodgates.
Will allow a number of materials brought in unregulated from other sources of which you would not know where they came from. Would you like that? Would that be beneficial to an organic farming situation in this town?
Well, if you're talking about something that's poisonous.
No, I'm just saying, in general, if I brought in material and you didn't know where it came from, and you could not say it definitely is organic or not, would it be negative or positive for what you're planning, what you say you currently use your property for? Very natural, very organic, and or otherwise. You can tell what's on your property. If your neighbor, you've made it clearly in your statement that if somebody else came over and started playing, let's say, a Roundup chemical on their property and starting using GMHO production of food, would that negatively impact your property or
That
not?
would negatively affect my personal property, yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Gentlemen, I would, what's that?
He's to identify himself.
Robert Bushnell, 102 Ferry.
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear.
Robert Bushnell, 102 Ferryhill.
Thank you, you have better hearing than me, Mr. Mayor. Yes, ma'am.
I want to take this opportunity to talk about incidents that happened last April. My name is Lisa Williams, 110 Ferrydale Road. April, the kids notified me that there was a car out front. I went out front and there was a white SUV, and the man identified himself as Tom Lane, the zoning enforcement officer. And at that time he said, I'm not allowed to have more than 10 chickens on my property without a permit. And then he went on to say they're not allowed to free range. So obviously I have chickens, and at the time I had about 22, I think, I'm not exactly sure. So again, he reiterated that I needed a permit for more than 10 chickens. He would send me a letter in the mail, not to hurry about going down here, just get the letter and come down and get my permit. Get the letter in the mail a month later. Then we had a full-blown water problem, rained for like months, and then we had a heat wave, so I didn't get down here until about August. It took me a long time, but I have kids, 9 kids. So I get down to town hall, and I go to zoning. I wanted to speak to Mr. Lane. He was out in the field. And I said to the lady, well, I want to take out a permit to have more than 10 chickens. And she told me, nobody in Clinton is allowed to have more than 10 chickens. I was a little dumbfounded. Hey, with 9 kids, I get a little deaf. Took all the information, went home, sat down, looked at it, went outside, and I'm playing surveyor, measuring off how far my buildings are. I'm not sure what I'm measuring for. Come back in the house, the doorbell rings. I get a visit from the state marshal for my summons to go to court. And he laughed and said, a neighbor must have complained about your chickens. And I said, well, I have really good neighbors. They love my chickens. But we looked at the name and he said, oh, it's the zoning enforcement officer. Great, what do I do? I have no idea. And I said, you take me to jail now? I don't know, is that what they do? I have no idea. So I had a month to go down and get my papers filed. Meanwhile, the next day, I come into town, we're having a meeting with some other parents about activities we could do in town with our children. And one woman piped up and said, she has a chicken farm, we can go visit her farm. And I said, oh really, how many chickens do you have? 15. I said, do you need a permit to have chickens? She said, oh no, in 2011, they told us you can have 15 chickens per acre. My head is spinning. I get a little ticked off because I hear this, I hear that, I hear this. My neighbor 5 years ago had told me that when he went to town hall to see about a permit, they told him, no, you don't need a permit. You can have a cow, you can have sheep, you can have chickens. So here it is. I stand here and get a summons to go to court like I'm a criminal. And all I want to do is feed my children fresh eggs, a fresh chicken. I know where the chicken eggs come from. They're very different from the ones at the grocery store. And I can show them to you next time. They're harder, they're fresher, they're better for you. More protein. So here I stand for the last 10 months, nervous. Am I going to get a knock on the door? Do I have to go to court again? I got all sorts of court papers. I don't have an attorney. I don't have the money for an attorney. My house is falling apart from Hurricane Irene still, because I can't afford to fix the siding on it. I still have the logs in the yard from Hurricane Irene. $4,500 a year in taxes. For what? I can't even have chickens without being terrorized by the town. I am a criminal.
Ma'am, you're not a criminal. And
I
what
feel
I'm
like
gonna
one.
What I'm going to say to you is this is why you don't have comments from the audience after the participation portion has ended. This is not a free-for-all for people to vent their frustrations either with the land use office.
I
or
have
any
no one to
individual.
vent them to,
Ma'am,
sir.
this hearing is on an application very specific to amend the regulations along the lines that you've heard tonight. You've been sitting here.
But we're talking about farms. I need
We're
to get
talking
this
about
out.
farms,
I
but we're
have nobody to speak to. I wanted to have a day in court, they denied me.
Ma'am.
They
I'm
denied me
not
my
here-
appearance.
I am not here, this commission is not here to listen to your specific
But are you
complaint.
responsible for Tom Lane and the laws?
Who responsible, Mr. He's was the zoning enforcement officer up until January 31st. He acts on his own pursuant to state statute. He is engaged by us, but he is his own person. Whether or not we have a problem with him is irrelevant to tonight's public hearing. You have a complaint, there are available means for you to avail yourself of, and I would encourage you to do so. If you think it's 10 chickens, 15 chickens, 20 chickens, 12 chickens, go to the land use office and have them explain it to you. That's all I can tell you.
No, it's not what I
We
think,
don't
it's what I
have-
was told. This is the problem.
But who, you were told by whom?
Mr. Lane, I was told to get a permit, I have it in a letter. I need more, a
Once-
permit
once
for
you
more than
just-
10
Let me
chickens.
just suggest something to you. Once there's a disagreement between an individual who's been cited by the zoning enforcement officer, there's a whole litany of things you can do to object to his decision. One of which is to appeal to the zoning board of appeals within 20 days. Did you do that?
15.
No, I would not know how to do that, it's not fair. How would I?
Well,
If I sit, I
no, there's-
just
there's
want to
only-
live my life in my little house
Ma'am,
with my
I'm not
family.
going to argue with you any further. I'm going
That's
to
fine.
ask you to please refrain from making any more specific comments about your specific situation.
Done.
This is an application for a zoning change that we're here to discuss and obtain evidence on. So I understand your frustration. You're very passionate about what you're doing. I commend you for that passion, to feed your children healthy food. I understand all that. But we all live in a society that requires us to be aware of how it impacts others next door to us.
And that's exactly what I did, I asked all my neighbors. That's
Right.
fine.
Any
I
specific
was out.
complaint about a zoning enforcement officer, we as a commission do not look over that person's head and make sure he's doing everything exactly the way we would do it. You know why? Because by statute, he's authorized to conduct that business as an enforcement agent. If he does it wrong, we eventually hear of it. And when we do, we may take action, we may not take action, and that's when you have a complaint against planning and zoning. Right now, I'm afraid you don't. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if we're through with the public, I'd like to recommend that we continue this public hearing for AR
I would
13.
require a motion for that, Mr. Mayor.
Making a motion.
To continue it until...
Continue AR 13-234, petition to amend zoning regulations for Jeffrey M. and Patricia Cashman until when, Julie?
We can have either the 10th, which is next
Third?
week, 10th, or March 3rd, 17th. I would
Recommendation
suggest
from the clerk, March 3rd.
March 3rd.
March 3rd.
I will make March 3rd at what time, Julie?
7.
7 p.m.?
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion in the second? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you. I will now entertain another motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
March 3rd. Shall continue.